Welcome to the Life's Best Medicine podcast, where we are finding hope and healing one episode at a time. No appointment needed, no rubber gloves, and no coping. Just a healthy dose of life lessons to help equip you for this wild journey we call life. Hey everyone, I just wanted to give you an update on my trip to Guatemala. It was profound and it was fun and I had a great time. And I just wanted to give a thank you to Simply Snacking and Sue. Just everyone loved it there. You know, I brought some snacks with me and packed them easily in my suitcase like you've been hearing me ramble about. But really, the joy that it brought people, they loved it. And I knew I was giving them some nutrition and they were really enjoying it. So I made a lot of friends thanks to Simply Snacking in Guatemala. And just wanted to give a shout out to Sue for making this possible, for sponsoring the podcast, and for providing a product that I can believe in that can help people. As a matter of fact, as an update, one of my patients who works for a big tech company said that they gave him responsibility for the break room, and now he has Simply. Hello and welcome to the Life's Best Medicine podcast. I'm sitting down for this one. This is going to be a rough one for me, but I think it's important that people know. This is Frank's episode. A friend of mine, Frank Crivello, was like a father to me. His wife was my receptionist, Ro, who I love dearly. Frank was an Italian immigrant, came to this country for a better life, and worked his tail off. He was a painter, worked his way up, being discriminated against because he was Italian initially, and worked his way up to get respect, and became a crew chief and did all this great stuff. But because of his exposure to a bunch of chemicals, he ended up getting pancreatic cancer. But over the years, even before that, he always welcomed us to his home, made a big Italian meal, as of course Sicilians have to do. But he made everything with love. He'd made his fried calamari, his handmade, homemade tomato sauce was the best in the world. But he just loved us. He'd open up his best wine and we would talk. Usually it would escalate into an argument about politics or how we should solve a war in the Middle East, or who was wrong, who was an idiot in politics. And we'd take opposite sides and raise our voices and hit the table sometimes. And he would always say, "For what?" We would get these discussions. We had so much fun, but it was never a personal attack. We never had debates about our faith. We both agreed that our faith, family, friendships are what's important, not prestige or money. And Frank would open his house to anyone, and he's a person that you wouldn't even know all the great things he did till after he passed away. A lot of people I talked to, that his life impacted their life. And the reason I'm bringing up Frank is this struggle he went through with pancreatic cancer. I talk a lot about faith and what's important. And when you're dying, you really understand what's important. Jesus, knowing he's dying, told his followers what was important. Frank in the same way. The one good thing about Frank was I had 100% exemption from having to clear the table or do the dishes. If I ever tried, he'd freak out and go, no, Brian, sit down. Always had a great respect for me being a doctor, a love and a respect. And I had the same respect for him. So over time, he gets diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, chemotherapy, radiation, all those kind of things, surgeries. And, I got his CAT scan results and I said, "Hey, Frank, good news. Your tumor shrunk by 70%. And he looked at me with disappointment. And I said, why is that? He said, "The chemotherapy is killing me. He said, I'm going to die from the chemotherapy. And I was hoping it wasn't working so I could stop the chemo." So I had a long talk with his oncologist and actually went with him to the appointment. And it was a tough one. It's a tough one when you love someone so much, but you don't want them to suffer. But you see the treatment's futile because he was in the hospital all the time. He had no quality of life and he was slowly, progressively dying. As a doctor, that's hard to see, right? Because we count death as a loss. As a failure of the medical system, but we all die at some point. But the thing with Frank was he went into it heroically. He got weaker. He was in bed a lot. And Nick, his good friend, best friend, and his wife Sue would be there. They made sure he had a lift so he can get out of the chair when he couldn't walk anymore, when he was too weak. They made sure all of his needs were met. That they were just very kind. Nick would massage Frank's feet. They grew up in Sicily together. They've known each other and did everything together and loved each other. Uh, Cold compresses on his forehead. Get him a drink when he needs it. Everyone took care of him. And then one day I was there, and Frank was kind of telling me that when he was really not feeling great and people that he didn't really want to see would come over, he would fake like he was falling asleep or that he was in pain or something, and then to get rid of him type thing, because he didn't want to be rude because he's such a nice guy. So we kind of laughed about that. And one day I'm sitting there at his bedside, and he's asleep, and I'm kind of sitting there waiting for him to wake up, and it's kind of an awkward thing. And he wakes up and looks at me, and I can see the disappointment in his eyes. And I said, "Hey, Frank, maybe it's not a good time. I can come back. Don't worry about it." Because my office was right down the street from his house. And he said, No, I'm happy to see you. I said, "Why do you look disappointed then?" He said, "I was just with my mom and my sister." He said, "I didn't want to come back, but I got to go through this process." He said, "I'm ready. I'm at peace, just so you know." So to see someone with his Catholic faith so ready and looking forward to that. And as a matter of fact, my wife came in that day. And well, the first thing he said, after that, he looked at me and called his wife and said, "Hey, get him something to eat, get him some food," type thing, because he couldn't do it anymore. And so she brought in Gatorade or something like that. And so I'm waiting for him to eat his meal. He got some food, and he said, "No, you first. Like, you eat first. I can't eat before you as a guest in my house." And so I'm trying to get him to eat. So but we had a great conversation about what matters and what's important, and the legacy that he left. He helped everyone. I talked to a lot of people, and they go, "Oh yeah, Frank, my dad was dying, and he was in the hospital every day." My dad, he took me to, some of the kids didn't want to go in the hospital when their dad was dying because they hated the hospital, and Frank would say, "I'll take him. I'll get him to his chemo. I'll do that thing." And then when it was his turn, he handled it with such grace and dignity, and realizing what's really important, right? It doesn't matter who the president is. Does it really matter who gets elected or what movie this actor's in or who's the best boxer of all time? And I think a lot of us get caught up in the minutia where we miss the big picture: faith, family, love, relationships. And Frank had all that stuff. So he taught me a lot about being a man, about respect, kindness, serving other people. So he leaves a legacy in me, and he leaves a legacy in his family, beautiful family. I can't eat fried calamari without thinking of him, right? And I try not to now because I'm a low carb guy. But, those kind of things, you think of the love that it was made with, and that he would sit there for hours, and the preparation that went into those meals, and the desserts when he made it or whatever it would be. He always made it very special. And he knew what each person liked, and he would make sure that was there, I blame him for some of my weight gain over the years, because his food was fantastic, and that would be the night off to enjoy. But it was always filled with love and peace. And so I think this is an important topic. I think Frank raises the topic of stuff we don't want to talk about: life and death, right? How do we go to death at peace? As a doctor, I see it a lot. And I just want to share some of my experiences that really made me think. When I was a kid, I was sitting at the kitchen table one day, and my cat goes out and kills a bird. He grabs the bird, and the bird's like, feathers are all over the place and all this stuff. So I'm like, holy cow, I got to save this bird. So I start to run out there, and my neighbor, who's an old guy, grabs me and says, "What are you doing?" I said, "Well, I'm going to try to save the bird." And he goes, "That's a cycle of life. There's life and there's death, and you can't intervene when nature's taking its course." And I think as a doctor, it's like, wow, why is it so hard for us to stop intervening? Why is it so hard for us to say, this is the end, and look for comfort? When I was in residency, there was a guy in the ICU that was on a balloon pump. He had pressors which keep the blood pressure going. He was on tons of antibiotics, and he had all this stuff. And I walk in one day, and the son looks at me and says, "Hey, you guys all know my dad's dying, right?" And I said, kind of looks that way. He said, it seems that no one wants them to die of their specialty. He says, the cardiologist comes in and says, yeah, his heart's doing fine. The brain guy says his brain's doing fine. This is fine. Everything's stable. But he's getting worse every day, and he's not going to get better, and he's not going to survive this visit, right? So that was a big thing for me to realize, yeah, sometimes we're dying, and no one wants to take responsibility for that death. Blame it on the cardiologist, blame it on this guy. He died because of his kidneys, not because of his heart or whatever. So, that's one of those things with death. Is such an uncomfortable topic. It's even uncomfortable for me as a doctor to talk about. But I think it's important to make amends while you're alive, to have grace and forgiveness and all those things. Why? Because I've seen people absolutely flogged because the son who hadn't seen the father for 10 years, all of a sudden steps in and goes, nope, we're going to do everything. Well, dad had a major stroke and he was dying, but he wasn't going to let go. So the dad gets trach tube, feeding tube, this, that, next thing, coded, anything. My gosh, is because of he wants to make amends that he's never going to be able to make amends for. Part of this is us understanding, like, hey, give your wife a kiss when you leave. Tell your kids you love them. Those kind of things, that's important. Frank, Nick and Frank, they loved each other and they told each other all the time. So they knew it. There was no question about it. And even Frank, going back to Frank a little bit, him and his wife had this thing, and he would say, I love you, and she would say, I love you more. And that was kind of always their thing, right? They loved each other more than the other one did. But they could not love each other, right? It's really critical, important stuff. And his wife was there to the last day and took care of him. Getting back to the hospital stuff. Another night, I was in the ICU, one of the busiest nights ever. Everything was crazy, and, new patients and admissions, and, I just didn't have time for stuff. I'm in the medical intensive care unit, and I get a call from the surgical intensive care unit, and they go, doctor, can you help us? This guy is absolutely refusing his oxygen, and he just won't do it. And I go, is he being rude? He'd say, no, he's very nice. He just won't do it. And the doctor wrote that he has to have the oxygen on. He said, can you just talk to him? I go, look, I'm so busy. I'll come over for 2 minutes, but I got a lot going on here. So I left the resident in charge, and I go over to the surgical intensive care unit, find the guy, and I go, hey, look, could you do me a huge favor? Do you mind just putting the oxygen on? I'm really busy, and I really don't have time to deal with this. I'd really appreciate it. And the guy looked at me and said, son, let me tell you something. I don't want to be disrespectful, and I don't want to put any more burden on you. Sorry. But I've lived a long, good life. My wife of 50 years, who I love, died 2 years ago. I've been in the hospital 10 times. He's breathing hard in between this. He goes, my time's here. I'm at peace. I know the Lord. I have no fear. I have no anxiety. I won't be upset with you if I don't make it through the night. He said, can you just give an old man that one wish of not wearing oxygen for a night? And if I don't make it, I don't make it. And I'm at peace with that. My family's at peace with that. And I know what awaits me. So I said, no problem. Next morning, dead, right? He's gone on to his glory. But it was his choice. And he said, look, I knew I'm not going to survive this thing. What am I going to do? Live in the hospital forever and use all the resources and all this when I know what's waiting for me, right? This is wisdom. This is a peace that surpasses all understanding. So when people ask me about faith, that's who I want to be. I want to be like Frank. I want to be like this guy, right? And so I think death and dying is such a hard topic for all of us. Like me as a doc, still emotional about it. I think if you don't have that emotion, because there's finality here on earth, but the point is, what legacy are we leaving? What relationships have we created? What do we breathe into other people? I think ultimately, I think this is part of why I'm doing this podcast, to say, look, this is real stuff. And a lot of us don't want to deal with it. And I didn't want to do a will because that like makes it final. I did my will like 12 years ago and I'm still here, right? But at the time I'm thinking, this is kind of eerie. Like, who would take care of my kids? Who would take care of all these things? And, it's just one of those things we don't want to talk about. But I think it's important, and this is from the medical side, is talk to your doctor while you're healthy and say, look, here's what's acceptable. Here's what's not. My dad has told me, look, if it's over, my head's off, don't try to put it back on. If I'm not breathing and this happened, to have certain criteria to say, where is life acceptable? Where is it not? And I think a lot of us, going out on our own terms is really critical. At least letting the family know, it will save you suffering and it saves them suffering. Because it's a problem when you say, I don't know what dad would want, so do everything. And then they're in the hospital for 8 weeks or 9 weeks, we've all seen these nightmare stories, and then they end up passing away anyways. And what I find is people who fear death want everything done, right? They say, keep me here no matter what. And people at peace, they just say, you know what? Don't waste the resources. As a matter of fact, I'll tell you another story. One of my favorite patients, his nickname was Red, had a huge aneurysm. He goes, I'm not fixing it. He never did. I'm not messing with it. And I happened to be out of town, luckily. And he ruptured the aneurysm and it leaked slowly. And the doctor came in and said, look, and his whole family, great family, was there. And they said, we could take you to surgery. He said, not putting my family through it. There's a risk of this, and my chance of survival is so low at this point. He said, I love my family. I've had a great life. Peace to everyone. Doctor, love you. And he went out that way. And I would have forced the issue with him because I love the guy so much. But fortunately for him and fortunately for me, I wasn't there at that time. Along these ways, Liz, I want to tell another story about death. And retired military, hard as nails doc, surgeon, tough guy, hard life. Demanding with his wife, tough surgeon type guy, came to me and it had having to get surgery, spinal surgery. And he had a lot of other health problems, but ends up getting spinal surgery. And during the course of his surgery, he had a leak in his spinal fluid. But before the surgery, he refused surgery for 2 days because the anesthesiologist didn't come up to the room and talk to him formally before the surgery. So he put the surgery off. So long story short, he couldn't be on blood thinners because of the leak in his spine, and he ends up getting a blood clot and passing away in the middle of the night. Right? It happened to be a night that I visit him every morning and every night. That night I said, you know, my wife's waiting for me. It's late. I got stuck at work. Go home. Passes away from a pulmonary embolism, most likely. They refused an autopsy, but I think that's what happened. But when I walked into I find out at 2 a.m, they say, hey, your patient just passed away. I was like, oh my gosh. Run into the hospital, sit there, his wife's sitting there. And I walked into the room and she stands up and says, I'm so sorry, doctor. I said, you're sorry. I'm thinking of all the stuff I'm going to tell her. So what are you sorry? She says, I'm sorry you have to go through this. I know how hard this is on you. And I was like, and we cried and we spent time together. It's brutal. It's brutal, right? When you want to help someone, and a surgeon who saved a lot of lives and did a lot of good things, he dies from a medical complication that, partially because he was stubborn. His wife even said that because we talked about we have to anticoagulate, we have to do certain things, and it was just one of those things. And in life, those things happen, and it's devastating every time for everyone. The surgeon was devastated. Everyone was having a hard time, but having grace and love and she could have yelled at everyone and made a scene and been nasty and mean, but having grace when you're on the receiving end of it is a huge deal. So, I think these are tough stories. I mean, these are things that affect us still. And you start thinking, okay, we're here to help people and we do our best. And I think a lot of us in life have to realize that we can't save everyone. And there's going to be times when we lose family members and everyone says, well, if God's great, how can people die? It's it's part of the cycle, just like with the bird. There's a part of the cycle where we do what we can to preserve life at all costs, but sometimes the cost is greater than the benefit. And so we have to look at that and say, okay, at what point is life not worth living? If I can't talk to you, and one last story. Another one is crazy. As a young doc, my grandma, who was that strong German lady I told you about, she would work in the garden, hike and walk and do all this stuff, strong as an ox, ends up having a stroke. And, they call me to the hospital. We all get there and, I'm saying, okay, we got to do this, knowing my medical background. And the doctor looks at me and goes, let me show you the CAT scan. And he goes, this is non-survivable. So I look at the scan, look at the stuff, and go, crud, this is non-survivable. So we said, let's take her home. Took grandma home. She had everyone who loved her around her bed, singing songs, holding hands, laughing, telling stories about dumb stuff she did. And, my dad was there and, took care of her and loved her, right? Best death ever, because she wasn't in pain and she wasn't suffering, and she was surrounded by a family that loved her. Now she could have died in the hospital in sterile conditions with, one family member at a time going in. But I think there's a lot to that. And since I'm on this death thing, I think I had to do a rotation at hospice, San Diego Hospice, which is no longer around. Why? Because they kept people alive too long, because they had to have a 6-month survival and they would live longer because they had excellent care and the place was beautiful. And they could bring their dogs there, and it was like French doors where, everyone could come visit. But I was there one of my first days, and this guy is having a party with all of his family and friends and everything. And I'm like, this is ridiculous. The guy's walking around saying hi to everyone. I'm like, this is like a crazy thing. Why is this guy in inpatient hospice when he's fine? And like, he's really sick. I'm like, oh, he's laughing and, hugging people and all the crazy stuff. Next morning, dead. Dead. And I'm like, how can that be? He held on because that was important to him, right? He wanted to have a last goodbye for everyone. And we see that a lot in medicine. I've seen people survive codes that they never should have survived. I've called a code and the guy came back. The medicine somehow kicked in and he ends up leaving the hospital, which is crazy. We can't do anymore. And his heart started beating again. I was listening. I'm like, we got a heartbeat, guys. Let's keep going. He ends up leaving the hospital. That's unheard of. That's crazy stuff. And it happened to be It's a Wonderful Life was playing in the background. I'll never forget that. He came back. Another lady. This is crazy. One of the ladies who worked down in the surgical suite, her mom was really sick and she was in the hospital. I was a resident and we flogged her all night. We're giving her all this stuff. And like, it was just tough. And I just stayed there in battle because I knew the lady and I didn't want her mom to die on my watch and all this stuff. And it was just, we threw everything at her just to keep her alive and for at least one more night. And I walk in the next morning. I slept for like an hour, but during my hour of sleep, I come in, I go, and she looked great and peaceful and kind. And I'm like, how are you? She was fine. Feeling good, like nothing happened. I'm like, huh? And I'm a little surprised. And she said, oh my gosh, did you say hi to the ladies that were just here? What ladies? She said, oh, there was just two beautiful women here that I was talking to. And they said, it's not my time yet. I go, really? What did they look at? Oh, they were beautiful. And then she's describing them to me. I'm like, I go out, the nurse is standing in the hallway. I go, hey, who was just here? She said, nobody. I said, there was just two women here like a few minutes ago. And she's like, no one's come in the room except you, doctor. And I was like, this is crazy. She ends up surviving the hospital stay. Crazy stuff. And so there's a lot, and I'll tell you other stuff that I can't explain. That was crazy, but amazing and remarkable. So there are things that we can't explain. I can't logically, maybe she had a dream, maybe it was just a weird thing, but for her vitals and everything else to turn around. And the other thing was, another one that's just crazy along those lines is just, since I'm telling stories, I had we signed, one resident signs out to the next one who's covering the next day. And he goes, hey, this guy, just make your appearance because, he's dying. He's on hospice. He's there. He perforated his gut and he's got all this stuff they can't fix. He's declined surgery and all this stuff. So I'm like, oh, okay. Yeah. So I walk into the room the next morning and the guy's sitting there reading the paper. I'm like, look at my paper and I'm like, go back out to the hallway and come back in again. I say, and I go, are you Mr. So-and-so? Yeah. I go, how are you doing today? He goes, feel great. Really? Weren't you pretty sick before? He goes, yeah, I think I was pretty sick, but so it turns out this guy sealed his perforation and this guy ends up leaving the hospital. I'm like, I did all the discharge paperwork and everything. I'm like, I got that. This guy was just dying. But, there's things like that where, I think we just can't explain it all. Happens. The surgeon nods. He's like, I don't know. I mean, it's just weird. So, there's a lot of stories like that. We've all seen that. Doctors have all dealt with this stuff. So I think part of it is having compassion for your doctor because they've dealt with a lot of emotional stuff and a lot of hard stuff. And I think life and death is a hard topic. Obviously, it's not one that we kind of say, hey, this sounds like a fun topic for a podcast. Let's talk about death and dying. But I think it's important to understand because at death is when we understand what's important in life. And I think a lot of us, because of this life experience, can reflect more and say, okay, what really matters? Does anyone die? And then you say, well, man, he had a nice car, or man, his house was the nicest on the block. No one really says those things. They talk about the time that they were struggling or hurting and you were there, like Frank, to hear the stories. And he made it a rule. He said, no one's going to talk nice about me when I die. You guys have your food and enjoy. And my other Italian friends, they brought all the food. They did all the stuff because they loved Frank and they just did it. And I'm like, these are good people, right? These are nice, kind, decent people. And, but to hear the stories of stuff he did and how he helped people was really crazy because I always thought of him as a pretty simple guy that just was, his word was his word. And he loved his family and loved his friends. But he reached out to a lot of people in the community and did a lot of good stuff. So these are the things saying, what kind of legacy? I think it's good when it's not a funeral. We're not at a funeral now, but I think to reflect on those things, because it made me think, what really matters? What really matters? Is it how many diplomas I have or what my paycheck is like or having money in the bank? Yeah, those things are important to have. But I think at the ultimate, you say, what kind of impact did I have? So I think this is a card, a calling card. I think Frank leaves a legacy to you now. And then you say, well, I hope I have that piece. Do I have that piece? Do I understand this stuff? No. I mean, none of us know. Darwin, I just think like all these guys, we could debate the point forever. What happens when you die? I could debate it forever, all right, based on people who came back, and we could say, yeah, maybe it was just a dream, maybe it was just oxygen deprivation in the brain. But I think at some point, it doesn't matter who the alien is in another planet. It doesn't matter if it's someone in the remote villages somewhere or some island where they've never seen people. It's really about you. And it's really about me. And I have to say, am I at peace? Am I doing the right? Am I living my life in a way that brings glory to God or helps other people around me? And you could argue the debate, and that's why people want to debate with me if there's heaven, hell, there's all this stuff, and I'm not the determiner of that, unfortunately for me. But the thing is, no one knows until they take their last breath. That's when you know. And that's why talking about death is important, because you don't want to be sitting there and then saying, well, I should contemplate this stuff. I've got like 12 seconds. Sometimes we don't have 12 seconds. Sometimes a plane crashes on us or something crazy happens and we don't have that time to reflect. So I think it's important now to sit there, and hopefully this stirs a little thought. It stirs thought in me. And this is a podcast that was going to be hard for me, I knew, just because of the emotional aspects of this stuff. But I think it's important to really get down to our humanity at some point, not our knowledge base or, this symptom, this drug, this treats that. Here's the, blood pressure drop, do this. And I think we can get so mechanical. And part of it too is, being a doc, I remember seeing the first code when that's when someone dies and you do CPR and you try to shock their heart back, and really stressful. And my resident goes, look, man, are you stressed about it? I go, yeah, it's stressful. And he goes, because what you do is when you're running the code, you step back and you say, okay, we have to have access. We have to get this. Someone starts the heart. Someone makes sure you're ventilating. All these things that will immediately kill the patient. We're trying to mechanically make that happen. But someone has to run the show. So I'm like, I'll just get the line here. I'll just do this. But then when it's your turn to run the show, my resident said, look, remember this. When you get there, the patient's already dead. All you could do is bring them back. They're already dead and you can bring them back. And I think that's something we kind of have to look at. And that takes the pressure off a bit, because you say, I can only intervene to help the people. And it's an ugly scene, but you're doing your best to help the person. So it's not always pretty and it doesn't always work out. And we have these fantasies that they do CPR and everyone comes back. It's not necessarily true. It's not true. It's definitely not true. But because there's a reason for your engine to break down, it's not just your battery's dead. It could be a bigger problem. So I think it's just that we reflect on these things. I think it's important to at least take a breath and say, okay, what do I believe? What do I think? Is it just because of what my dad thought? Or is this because of what I think or my life experience? Because no matter what, when we take our last breath, we know the answer. I like to hedge my bets a little bit, and that's just my style. I'm not a risk taker, as you know by now. So, hey, thank you for listening. I know this may not be the most uplifting talk, but I think it's important. I think it's important that we reflect and we talk about these hard things. And maybe if it stimulates someone to talk to their family about what their desires are, or loving their family a little bit more, or being kinder to that stranger on the street, realize, I'll leave you with this. This is from my pastor, Dave Hoffman. We're sitting there one day and he's kind of a quirky guy and impatient and all this. And he goes, Brian, it's all about the potato salad. What are you talking about? He goes, it's just about the potato salad, ultimately. He goes, look, I'm a pastor and I do funerals all the time. And he says, you know what happens? You go to the service and all this stuff, and we say our thing and whatever. People like tell their story, whatever. Someone gives a eulogy, and then you go back to Aunt Betty's house or someone's house, and everyone's there, and they're, for some reason, he said they're all eating their potato salad and talking about your life. And they're either saying, gosh, what a tragedy, what a waste. He could have done so much with his life. He could have done this, just in small talk. Or they say, you know what, he saved my life, or he was the one who helped me get the courage to go to med school, or the one who encouraged me to lose weight, or the one who encouraged my marriage, or spoke truth to me when I was going to kill myself that day. And it is amazing that we don't think about that. I think we have to think it's all about the potato salad, and I'll leave it at that. And it's not always potato salad. Frank's funeral, I don't think we had potato salad, but we had some good pasta, that's for sure. So it might be about the pasta, it might be whatever your tradition is. But I think at some point, knowing you're leaving a legacy, I think that's important. So God bless. Be at peace. Have a great week, and take care of each other, and think a little bit. Thank you for listening to this episode. We greatly appreciate your support. We would greatly appreciate a positive thumbs up on all of the platforms like iTunes and Spotify or wherever you're listening. And we just thank you for our Patreon supporters. We greatly appreciate your help in getting this message out. We think there's a lot of important information, and hopefully this helps you. Have a great day, and thank you for listening, and thank you for your support.